Welcome back to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Love series. Um, we've been following this case and, the basics, but uh, what's really intriguing is how this guy, seemingly ordinary, working in a luxury hotel, becomes the center of this brutal crime.
Yeah, it is. It is fascinating. We often associate these grand hotels with this sense of safety, and an order. But this case really peels back that facade and reveals that darkness that can look beneath the surface.
Exactly. And we're talking about the 2021 Bengaluru Hotel Staff Murder. Our victim, Rohan Das, was a young man working in housekeeping, at this prestigious hotel, described as hardworking and friendly, big dreams for his future in the world of hospitality.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that first and foremost, we're talking about a life tragically cut short, a young man with aspirations, and loved one suddenly gone.
Absolutely, and it just adds to the tragedy that Rohan had become close friends with a colleague. Priya Menon, she was a charming and ambitious receptionist at the hotel. And this friendship, innocent as it seemed, ended up being the catalyst for this horrifying chain of events.
It did, because
Yeah.
this is where that twisted love element comes in, right? There was another staff member, Karan Sharma. He was a bellboy and was deeply infatuated with Priya. And as Rohan and Priya's friendship blossomed, Karan's feelings kind of morphed into something much darker and obsession.
Okay, so we have this classic love triangle forming, but Karen's obsession went beyond just harboring these silent feelings, right?
Yeah.
He was actively making things difficult at work for everyone.
He was, exactly. He would make these snide remarks about Rohan, try to isolate Priya from him, even had these volatile outbursts,
Right.
in front of other staff. And looking back, these were clear warning signs that something was seriously wrong.
And that confession seems like a slam dunk. I'm curious, though, are there ever cases where someone confesses and is still found not guilty?
That's a great question. While it is rare, it does happen. A confession can be deemed inadmissible if it was coerced or if the individual wasn't of sound mind, when confessing. Or if the confession itself is later contradicted by, undeniable evidence. Those cases are fascinating because they force us to really examine the complexities of human behavior and, the fallibility of our perceptions.
That makes sense, but wouldn't some level of jealousy be normal in this situation? I mean, unrequited loves, it can be tough to deal with.
Right.
Where's the line between, normal feelings and, as you put it, something much darker?
Right. That's a nuanced point, and it's crucial to differentiate between those fleeting feelings of envy and an all-consuming obsession. It's about the intensity, the duration, and most importantly, the actions that it drives. Khan's behavior demonstrated a fixation that went beyond simply feeling jealous. It manifested in deliberate attempts to sabotage Rohan and isolate Priya.
So fast forward to the night of March 15th, 2021. Rohan's working the late shift, last seen around midnight, heading toward the staff quarters. The next morning, his body is discovered in a storage room, brutally stabbed. That must have been a horrifying discovery for the hotel staff. I mean, imagine finding out your coworker, this seemingly quiet guy, is capable of this.
Absolutely. The impact on the staff can't be understated. Imagine going to work every day, seeing these people, exchanging pleasantries, and then suddenly this brutal act just shatters that sense of normalcy. The psychological and emotional toll on the staff must have been immense.
Yeah, it sends chills down my spine just thinking about it. It's a hotel, a place where people come to relax, escape, and yet behind the scenes, this simmering tension, this resentment had been building.
Yeah.
And it eventually led to this horrific act.
It did, exactly. It's a stark reminder that these seemingly safe and controlled environments can hide those deep-seated conflicts and volatile emotions, and it makes you question how well you really know someone, right? Even in a workplace where you see colleagues daily, you might only be scratching the surface of their inner world.
Right. Okay, so the crime scene is discovered, and suspicion naturally falls on Karan. But suspicion alone doesn't lead to a conviction. What was the hard evidence that sealed Karan's fate?
Well, the investigation was incredibly thorough, and they uncovered 4 key pieces of evidence. It was like fitting together pieces of a puzzle, and each piece pointed undeniably to his guilt.
This is where it gets really interesting. Let's break those down, starting with the CCTV footage. What did that reveal?
Well, the CCTV footage from the hotel was absolutely crucial to the case. It showed Karan entering the storage area shortly after Rohan, and then, crucially, leaving in a hurry carrying something bulky, concealed under a cloth. Investigators later confirmed that this concealed item was the murder weapon.
Okay, so placing him at the scene, potentially with the murder weapon. What else?
Next, we have witness testimonies. Several of Karan's colleagues came forward, describing his, increasingly erratic behavior in the days leading up to the murder. They spoke about his open resentment towards Rohan, his attempts to isolate Priya, and even overheard him making threats.
So this wasn't just a case of him snapping. His resentment was this open secret among the staff. Was there any physical evidence linking Karan to the crime?
There was, absolutely. The murder weapon, a knife, was recovered from a dumpster near the hotel. And both fingerprints, ANA, DNA evidence on the knife matched Karan's. This was undeniable proof of his involvement.
Wow, that's pretty damning evidence. But it gets even more incriminating, right? He confessed.
He did. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence against him, Karan broke down and confessed to the crime. He admitted to luring Rohan to the storage room under false pretenses and then attacking him in a fit of jealous rage. This confession, combined with the other evidence, essentially sealed his fate.
You mentioned Priya relocated. That makes me wonder what kind of support exists for people caught in these kinds of situations. Being the object of someone's dangerous obsession must be terrifying.
Yeah, you're right to bring that up. It's a side of these cases that often gets overlooked, but there are resources available, thankfully. Organizations dedicated to supporting victims of stalking and harassment. They provide counseling, legal aid, safety planning, and even relocation assistance in these extreme cases.
That's good to know that that kind of support exists. This case really highlights how a seemingly harmless workplace friendship can become the trigger for this tragic chain of events. So with this mountain of evidence, the trial begins, but surprisingly, the defense tries, well, this tactic.
Well, before we get to the trial, I think it's important to take a moment to acknowledge that beneath the legal proceedings and the evidence, there are real people whose lives were irrevocably changed by this act. Rohan's family and friends, the hotel staff, and of course, Priya. Their pain and loss are immeasurable.
Absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in the details of the case. But we must remember that at the heart of this is a human tragedy with far-reaching consequences.
You're absolutely right. It's about acknowledging the human cost of these crimes, the ripple effect they have on individuals, families, and communities. It's about recognizing that behind the headlines and legal arguments, there are lives shattered and dreams left unfulfilled. So with this mountain of evidence, the trial begins. The prosecution's argument was built around premeditation. They set out to prove that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of passion, but a calculated plan driven by Karan's obsession.
You mentioned premeditation was key for the prosecution. Can you walk us through exactly how they proved that and what counterarguments did the defense use?
Of course. The prosecution meticulously laid out their case using the evidence we discussed. The CCTV footage of Karan entering the storage room after Rohan, the witnesses who spoke about his escalating threats, and of course the forensic evidence tying him directly to the murder weapon. They argued that these elements combined showed clear intent and planning. The defense, however, attempted to paint a different picture. They tried to argue that Karan was mentally unstable at the time of the crime, that the act wasn't premeditated, but a result of emotional distress, a plea for leniency based on a momentary lapse in judgment.
So essentially a crime of passion defense. Did that hold any weight, given the evidence?
Yeah, that's precisely what they aimed for. They tried to portray Karan as a man driven to the brink by unrequited love, his actions a result of a temporary mental breakdown. However, the prosecution countered this effectively. They brought in experts who testified that while Karan might have had emotional struggles, there was no indication of severe mental illness that would have rendered him incapable of understanding the consequences of his actions. The brutality and calculated nature of the attack, as they argued, pointed to a level of control that contradicted the defense's claims.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue crime of passion when there's evidence of planning and a deliberate attempt to cover up the crime. But let's talk about the hospitality industry for a second. What kind of impact did this case have on hotels? Did it lead to any changes in security protocols or the way they handle potentially volatile situations between staff?
Oh, this case absolutely sent shockwaves through the industry. It was a wake-up call forcing hotels to reevaluate their security measures and, importantly, their approach to employee well-being. Many hotels, particularly those in Bengaluru and across India, implemented stricter background checks for potential employees, increased surveillance, particularly in staff areas, and introduced mandatory training programs for staff to recognize and address potential conflicts or warning signs of violence.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
It's sad that it takes a tragedy like this to bring about these changes, but at least some good came out of it. So with the prosecution presenting a strong case focused on premeditation and the defense's crime of passion argument, failing to convince the jury, what was the verdict?
Well, the jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with a guilty verdict. Karan Sharma was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge in his closing remarks emphasized the calculated nature of the attack, the devastating impact it had on Rohan's family and colleagues, and the need for a sentence that reflected the severity of the crime.
A tragic end for everyone involved. Rohan's life cut short. Karan facing a lifetime behind bars, and Priya left to deal with the trauma of losing a friend and the unsettling knowledge of being the object of such a dangerous obsession.
It is. It's a heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating consequences that can stem from unaddressed mental health issues, unhealthy obsession, and unchecked rage. It's also a powerful lesson for all of us to be more attuned to the struggles of those around us, to notice the red flags, and to intervene if we sense someone is heading down a dangerous path.
Absolutely. Early intervention and open communication could have potentially prevented this tragedy. We often focus on the legal aspects of these cases, but the human element is what truly resonates. The pain, the loss, the lasting impact on everyone involved, those are the things we should never forget.
You're so right. Behind every crime statistic, every legal battle, there are real people whose lives have been forever altered. It's a humbling reminder of our shared humanity and the importance of empathy and compassion.
Yeah, it is a sobering thought, and one that really challenges those assumptions that we have, about safety and security. We often think of these luxury hotels as these havens, a world away from, the harsh realities of life. But this case really starkly reminds us that darkness can penetrate even the most seemingly, impenetrable walls.
It's that contrast, isn't it? The juxtaposition of this opulent setting, a symbol of wealth and exclusivity with this brutal reality of the crime. It's like something out of a psychological thriller.
Exactly. It's almost as if the facade of luxury kind of amplifies the shock and horror of the act. It shatters that illusion of safety and order that we often associate, with these spaces. This whole case has really made me think about the hidden lives of the people we encounter every day. The colleagues we work with, the neighbors we greet, even the strangers we pass on the street. We often only see a glimpse of their lives, a carefully constructed persona. But beneath that surface, who knows what battles they might be fighting, what demons they might be grappling with.
Yeah, you've touched on a profound point. We move through the world assuming a certain level of predictability and order, but this case forces us to confront the inherent unpredictability of human behavior. The fact that someone we might perceive as ordinary, even pleasant, can harbor such darkness within them is a chilling reality.
It is unsettling, to say the least. And speaking of unsettling, we haven't talked much about Priya. You mentioned earlier that she relocated, but I can only imagine the emotional toll this whole ordeal must have taken on her.
Absolutely. It's crucial to remember that while Karan's actions ultimately led to Rohan's death, Priya was also a victim in this tragedy. She was the object of his unhealthy obsession, his unwanted attention, and ultimately the catalyst for his violent act.
It's like a ripple effect, isn't it? The violence might be directed at one person, but the trauma spreads outward, impacting everyone connected to the situation.
Precisely. And in Priya's case, she not only lost a friend, but also had her own sense of safety and trust just shattered. Imagine the fear she must have felt, the constant looking over her shoulder, the uncertainty of knowing that someone harbored such dangerous fixations towards her.
It's a side of these cases that often gets overlooked, the lasting trauma experienced by those who are indirectly targeted or caught in the crossfire of someone else's obsession. It's a reminder that healing from these kinds of events takes time support and, a recognition of the invisible wounds that run deep.
You're right to highlight that. It's about acknowledging those invisible scars, the psychological and emotional toll that these experiences take on individuals. It's about providing support resources and a safe space for healing and recovery.
This whole conversation has been incredibly insightful, and I think it's safe to say that the Bengaluru Hotel Staff Murder is a case that will stay with us long after this deep dive. It's a story that challenges our assumptions about safety, reminds us of the fragility of life, and underscores the importance of vigilance, empathy, and open communication.
I couldn't agree more. It's a story that forces us to confront the darker aspects of human nature, the potential for violence that exists within seemingly ordinary individuals. But it's also a story that highlights the importance of hope, resilience, and the power of human connection to help us navigate the complexities of life and to support one another through those difficult times.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Bengaluru Hotel Staff Murder. We hope this conversation has been as thought-provoking for you as it has been for us.
And remember, if you or someone you know is struggling with similar issues, please reach out for help. There are resources available, and you don't have to face these challenges alone.
And don't forget to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle on your favorite podcast platform. And check out our YouTube channel for more deep dives into these intriguing stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay engaged.